As Myanmar's crisis continues to intensify, there is growing pressure being placed on the nations in Southeast Asia, on ASEAN. And this pressure is being placed on them by the so-called international community, which is just a euphemism for the West, for the United States, the UK, the European Union, and all of these other nations that go along with their foreign policy objectives. Now, what are they being pressured to do? They're not being pressured to end the conflict in Myanmar. They're being pressured to help advance Western foreign policy objectives regarding Myanmar. And so they've been using a handful of talking points to kind of pressure and shame Southeast Asian governments into going along with this. And so the first one that I hear often is the violence must end. And of course, the violence should end in Myanmar. But when they talk about violence, they're only talking about the military and police using violence. They are not talking about the opposition attacking them, provoking violence, and they're not even talking about the now admitted armed ethnic groups that are involved in fighting the government now, or the fact that the so-called peaceful protesters have war weapons they claim are coming from these ethnic armed groups. So this is an armed conflict, and if you want an armed conflict to stop, you need to address the violence on both sides, not just one side. That is a recipe for the prevailing side to just exterminate the other side, like what happened in Libya, where they're still killing each other to this very day. That's what the US wants to turn Myanmar into. So ASEAN leaders and diplomats and people in the media, beware of that. That's what you're helping contribute to when you repeat these talking points. The second one is Myanmar must return to democracy. There was never any democracy in Myanmar. Aung San Suu Kyi and her National League for Democracy were created by the US and British governments. They are a product of foreign interference. They are not democracy. They are not a democratic party. They are agents of a foreign government acting on their behalf and completely dependent on their support financially and politically. There is an enormous network created and funded every year by the US government in Myanmar. You can just go to the National Endowment for Democracy's own website and look. There's over 80 programs there. Interfering in virtually every aspect of Myanmar's internal political affairs. If you hold an election in that sort of environment, it could never, by any stretch of the imagination, be considered free and fair. So it is impossible for Myanmar to return to democracy. The only thing that's possible is for ASEAN to be made by the US to force Myanmar's military to allow the US client regime back into power. That's what they actually mean when they say return to democracy. Now, the third and final one is Myanmar's military must stop defying world opinion. So if international community is a euphemism for the West, then world opinion is a euphemism for whatever Western propaganda is promoting. So let's look at the narrative that we're being told about Myanmar. We're only hearing one side of the story. Facebook, Twitter, Google, they all bragged about how they removed Myanmar's government from all of their platforms. Their side of the story isn't being told here. And all we're hearing is from the BBC or Reuters or Voice of America or CNN or all of these US government-funded fronts in Myanmar pretending to be independent media outlets. That's the only information that we're getting now out of Myanmar. So if there is a real world opinion, it is grossly misinformed because it was only told one side of the story. This is what the US did in Iraq in 2003 in the lead up to the invasion. This is what they did to Libya and Syria in 2011. It's what they did in Ukraine in 2014, Hong Kong more recently, and also here in Thailand. They lie about everything, and now they're lying about Myanmar. So these are the three talking points that I hear all the time. The politicians, the diplomats, the media, the people living in ASEAN need to really ask themselves, do you really want to sleepwalk into another US-backed regime change crisis? Look at Libya, look at Syria, look at Yemen, look at Ukraine. The only place you can look at and not see an absolute nightmare is Hong Kong because China stopped it before it turned into a nightmare. So ASEAN needs to ask themselves how they can do that in Myanmar. If you thought the video was useful, please like and share. Try to get the word out there to people. Subscribe to the channel because that helps the channel grow and it's free to do. Look in the video description for ways you can help support my work. And as always, thank you for watching.